let's talk a little bit more about Star Wars. But before we talk about Star Wars, let's talk about risk and restaurants. Yes, restaurants. I want you to answer this question to yourself real quick. How many times would you be willing to go to a restaurant and be served bad food and bad service before you stopped going to that restaurant? I think for most people, the number would be highly variable depending on their relationship with the business. If it's the first time going to a restaurant, you're probably never going to go back if you have a bad experience. There's too many other options for consumers, too many other places that you can spend your money on a Friday or Saturday night. However, if you have a really long history with a restaurant, if you've been going there for a whole bunch of years and you've always been getting good value for your money, good food, good service, and you go one time and it's bad, you might just chalk it up to some random bad luck. Like there was some alignment of events that happened to deliver you bad food, and it's not necessarily indicative of the overall quality of the restaurant. They had a bad night. So you go again another week and you get bad service again. Now you start to think it's a pattern. You're going to be a lot more critical and hesitant to go there in the future. For me, I think the magic number is about 3. If I've gone 3 times within a certain short time frame and it's been pretty bad, I'm probably never going to go again. I'm going to consider that the overall quality of the business has declined enough that I don't want to go. For you, it may vary. But what's essential is 2 things in this sort of restaurant scenario I'm setting up. One is repeat customers are essential for the continuation of the business. You can't sell one meal to everybody in town and survive as a restaurant. You have to have repeat customers. You have to have people coming consistently. And so if you turn one person off, that could significantly impact your business in a negative way, which is why these chain restaurants, just corporate, will bend over backwards to keep you a customer. They will give you a $50 gift card if you have a bad experience. They'll come down on management and local stores and things like that because they know that they need people coming over and over again, and that people are going to rely not just on the quality for a few times, but that it's always going to be high quality. And that's because of this other thing, risk. There's an element of risk whenever you have a transaction. Whenever you buy something, you are essentially trusting that it's going to be good enough to justify the amount of money that you spent on it. So there's a little bit of risk that you're going to buy a bad product. The amount of consumer information you have prior to buying that product increases the certainty that you're going to be getting your money's worth. But with a restaurant, there's a lot of indeterminate value in the future whenever you buy a meal. You don't know whether each individual meal is going to be good or bad. You're kind of trusting that it's going to be good or bad based on your past experience. If you've been to the restaurant a bunch of times and it's always been good, you're going to assume that the next time you go, it's also going to be good. Especially if your friends have been said it's going to be good, you have lots of other consumer information that kind of helps you make that risk assessment. But if you go one time and it's bad or it's not worth the money that you're getting, all of a sudden you can end up reevaluating that. That starts to kill this big backlog of trust that restaurants developed. Now, what does this have to do with movies? Well, essentially movies have a similar sort of business issue and business model in that there's a risk assessment that a consumer makes before he sees a movie, and repeat customers are necessary. Obviously, cinemas need repeat customers. They need people from the same town coming all the time to see the movies, or they're not going to survive. You can't sell every person in town one movie ticket and survive. You have to be selling multiple movie tickets to them over time. So the cinemas need repeat customers. The studios need repeat customers as well. They need people coming to see their movies over and over again so that they can survive. And franchises in particular really need those repeat customers. They need a lot of consumer trust and value in their brand for them to be able to make money. And Star Wars is an excellent example of that. Star Wars was bought for $5 or $6 billion. In order to recoup that entire investment, in order to get an ROI, a return on investment for that, you need people to be going to multiple movies and buying products and putting a lot of money into that franchise to make back that $6 billion. And if you are isolating, or if you are giving a bad product to the consumer, how many times do you think you can give them that bad product before they look at the brand and they have a risk aversion to it? This is one of the things about like opening weekend receipts. People be like, oh, the Last Jedi had this amazing opening weekend. It's like, great. that is not indicative of the quality of the movie at all. It is only indicative of the signals prior to the movie's release that compelled consumers to buy tickets for that opening weekend. Because when you buy a movie ticket, just like when you sit down to eat at a restaurant, when you sit down to eat at a restaurant, you're basically entering into a contract that you're going to pay for whatever food and service you get. When you buy a ticket ahead of time at a movie, you don't know if the movie's going to be good, just like how you don't know if your meal is going to be good. You're assuming it's going to be of a particular quality based on past experience and information. When you sit down at a movie theater and you get a bad experience and it's not worth the money that you paid, that affects your future assessment of the risk. Whenever you buy a movie ticket, you're making a risk assessment. Is this going to be worth my $8, $10? Is this going to be worth my time to sit through? And every consumer, it's going to be a different point before they make a different risk evaluation on a particular movie or particular franchise or particular studio in some cases. But franchises right now are kind of the big dinosaur on the block. So you have to kind of look at them as a special case of really needing repeat customers and really needing to inspire repeat customers. And I think if you look at the opening weekend receipts of The Last Jedi, and then you look at the next weekend, which it dropped by like half or something. I don't have the figures in front of me. I'm just talking into a camera, but you can look it up. That's much more indicative of the quality than just the opening receipts are, or maybe even the total sales really are. Is this drop? It's the dynamics that matter. It's what happens over time that indicates the quality of the product when you're looking at sales, rather than just one particular event or one small set of events. Because people going into The Last Jedi, enough fans liked Force Awakens that they were going into it with a high set of expectations. They went into it thinking, well, that my $10 is really going to recoup. I'm really going to get $10 worth of entertainment out of this. And when it didn't happen, not only did they not come back the second week, because Star Wars fans will see a movie in theaters 3, 4, or 5 times sometimes. They didn't go for the second weekend, and they told all their friends not to go either. And so once that consumer information starts to percolate out, it's kind of like you go to a restaurant. If it's bad, you're like, hey, Billy, I went to that restaurant. It's bad. And they're like, okay, I won't go there this week. You start to spread out that consumer information, particularly the way it spreads socially, which is information flows both ways. When you have that social connection, they're like, hey, did you see Last Jedi? I did. It sucked. Oh, well, this critic said it's good. Well, he's crazy. I think you'll hate it. Well, then I'm not going to go. I'm going to wait for it to be on Blu-ray. So when you see it change over time, that's when things really matter, just like with a restaurant. Let's say you are going to launch a restaurant. You spend a bunch of money on marketing. You pack the house the first night, and it's great. Next week rolls around. There's half as many people there. Okay, we're expecting some drop-off. Obviously, we're not marketing for super hard for the second weekend. Third weekend comes around. It's like, well, yeah, we're not advertising really hard for it. But after a certain amount of time, it keeps going down and down. You have a quality problem and not just a problem with marketing. Like your first weekend was not indicative of your overall quality, but the amount of repetition over time is really what determines the quality. It's the dynamic part of it. It's the over time part of it that really ends up mattering. So you have to look at both of those things. So people are talking about boycotting Solo, this next Star Wars movie. So I think it's a pretty simple thing. How many bad movies have Disney delivered you? And does that indicate to you that you should continue attending their restaurant, so to speak? Should you continue giving them money? And how you want that as a consumer, how you want to view that. Because chances are, if you haven't liked the last few Star Wars movies, like, why would you assume that this one is going to be different? I know that there's different things. There's a director I like for Solo. I personally do not expect it to be good. I expect it to be on the quality of the other ones, if not a little bit lower, because of its troubled production. So my expectations are actually a little bit lower than the other movies, but you need to make that determination as a consumer. An organized boycott, I don't think, is really all that necessary. Eventually, consumers, if they continue to be delivered a bad product, will end up voting with their dollars anyway. The other problem with boycotts, so this is, I guess, the last topic I'll talk about, the problem with boycotts. Problem with boycotts is they're only really effective in very small markets where you can socially control a huge portion of a consumer base. So if you want to boycott Walmart in some tiny little town in Texas, you could probably very effectively boycott Walmart because you can socially control all the people in the little town. If you want to boycott a restaurant in some little town, it might be pretty easy to do. Question is, why are you doing it? Because if the restaurant is delivering bad food to people, there's no need for a boycott. People will just stop going to see it or going to eat their food on their own. Usually boycotts happen because of some moral reason that exists at the bottom of it. Like, this restaurant owner has a dog fighting ring, so you boycott his restaurant in response. You punish him, you punish his consumer interests because his moral interests are not aligned with the community. And that's usually how effective boycotts work. Problem is, when you look at the entire United States or the entire world, it's almost impossible to organize any kind of significant boycott whatsoever. And that's because the consumer base is too large and too diverse. So a group of fans that are highly dedicated and really want to boycott Solo, yeah, they're not going to go see this Star Wars movie. But lots of other people will that have no connection with them and don't care about their opinions or liked The Last Jedi or liked the other movies or liked them enough to view this next one as a positive engagement with risk and their money. So even if they weren't crazy about The Last Jedi, they're probably going to look at Star Wars and be like, well, it's probably worth my $10 on some Saturday. We'll go with the family, whatever. We'll probably get our money's worth out of it. And it's only really going to change on this big scale once consumers look at it and they're like, it's a Star Wars movie. It's probably not worth $10. So I'm being very honest here. I don't see any kind of way to socially organize a boycott big enough to get rid of Kathleen Kennedy at the top of the studio. And even if you get rid of her, there's all the people she hired. They're still there, right? So you've cut the top out, but there's still like a lot of convergence within the company. So I wouldn't expect that to change as much as people would like it to change. Kind of like how you can fire a CEO, but if you keep all the people that they've hired and all the people those people have hired, you haven't really changed that much about the company. The problem is Lucasfilm as a company in total now is a very different beast than it was when George Lucas ran it and when he produced all of his Star Wars movies. Got to be honest about this, folks. A boycott of something of this magnitude is probably going to be impossible to organize. However, the problem is the solution, is that eventually the devaluation of the franchise happens because of continuing bad products, lowering consumer value to the point where a consumer goes to the cinema in the afternoon with their family and they have a choice between, I don't know, Jurassic World 6 and Star Wars Episode 12. And they look at it and they're like, Star Wars isn't really worth $10. Let's go see this. Or even worse, if they're like, let's go see some dumb comedy instead of Star Wars. At that point, once the brand value has declined and they're no longer recouping that investment on a movie to movie basis, that's when you're going to see a lot more shakeups in studios actually happen. So it's true, punish them with your dollars, but you should do it as a consumer because it first benefits you. Why would you spend $10 to see something that you have no confidence that you're going to like? You shouldn't. Now, the other thing is, if you look at it as something in total, if I go see Solo and I do a review of it, which I probably will because it's part of what I do, and it turns out to be a good movie and, whatever, it beats the odds and becomes a good movie. Maybe that's the one you go see in theaters, but you never go see another one in theaters without really getting a lot of consumer information because you've been burned. And then you have to flip the question, how many times in a row can you be delivered a good experience after having a bad one before you trust that the good experiences are going to continue? I don't know what the question is there, but I think it's a lot harder to gain reputation than it is to lose it. I think it takes a lot longer to build up a positive reputation than it takes to lose a reputation. You can lose your reputation as a restaurant with one bad meal, and it may take months or years to gain that reputation. And that is something that's worth thinking about, is what is lost is very hard to gain back. So what I expect to see is a slow decline of the franchise in general with no great big budget return, because by the time it has low value, you're not going to have enough investment money being put into the movies to deliver the same quality you want. It would take so much longer to build it back up to being highly profitable. I don't know if it'll ever happen. So that's sort of my thoughts on that. Of course, don't go see a movie that you think is going to be bad. And you should do that first and foremost for you, not because you intend to change something about a company that you have no control over. Boycotts, this idea of boycotting Solo, this is something from people who still really care about Star Wars and really want it to be great. And just like Yoda said, you have to divorce yourself from attachments. You have to detach yourself. It's not, you have to kind of come to grips with reality that it's probably not the franchise that you want it to be, and that's okay. There's other stuff to listen to. There's other stuff to watch out there in the world, and that doesn't mean you can't have fun. It just means, hey, the fandom is kind of in the past, and I like the stuff from the past, and that's okay too. So think about it along in those terms. I don't want to be a super negative Nancy. In fact, I'm not being negative at all. Do what's appropriate for you as a consumer, and eventually things will work out, because that which cannot continue is not going to continue. Eventually the bottom line will kind of work out all the kinks. It just may take longer than you're expecting. And also, don't assume that other consumers think the way that you think. Most consumers, I think, are going to view a positive, they're going to look at the risk assessment for a Star Wars movie and view it positive for a long time in the future, just because the production values are high. Same thing with Marvel movies, to be honest, as well. So have a good one, and I will see you guys next time.